Ephesians 4:32. And be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. There is a certain beauty in forgiveness that the world rarely understands. It is not simply letting someone off the hook. It is not pretending that the pain never happened. True forgiveness is a spiritual act, a divine reflection of the heart of God. When Paul writes these words in Ephesians 4:32, he is not giving a suggestion for polite behavior. He is revealing a key to living in the freedom and power that God intends for every believer. This verse begins with the instruction, "Be ye kind one to another." Kindness is the soil in which forgiveness grows. Without kindness, forgiveness becomes forced, mechanical, or even fake. Kindness softens the heart. It makes it possible to see people through God's eyes rather than through the lens of their mistakes. A kind heart doesn't rejoice in another's downfall. A kind heart is willing to build bridges rather than walls. When Paul tells us to be ye kind, he is asking us to live in a way that chooses compassion over criticism, patience over punishment, and love over bitterness. Then he adds, tender-hearted. This is important because kindness can be an external act, but tenderness is an internal attitude. You can act kind toward someone while still harboring hardness inside. Tender-heartedness means your emotions have been softened by God's love to the point where you genuinely care about the well-being of others, even those who have wronged you. Jesus was the perfect example of tender-heartedness. He looked at the crowds, many of whom would later cry, "Crucify him," and still felt compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Matthew 9:36. Tender-heartedness gives you the ability to see the hurt behind a person's actions, the brokenness behind their offense. Then comes the core instruction, forgiving one another. Forgiveness is not optional for the believer. It is not dependent on whether the other person apologizes, changes, or makes amends. Forgiveness is a command because it reflects the very nature of the God we serve. But Paul doesn't stop there. He gives us the standard for our forgiveness, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. This is not about forgiving halfway or forgiving only when it's convenient. It's about forgiving in the same way that God forgave you, fully, freely, and forever.
When God forgave you, He did not keep a list of your past sins to throw back in your face later. He did not say, "I forgive you, but I'll be watching to see if you slip again." No, He removed your sins as far as the east is from the west. Psalm 103, verse 12. He clothed you in righteousness, not because you earned it, but because Christ paid for it. If God forgave you while you were still His enemy, Romans 5:8, then how much more should you extend forgiveness to others who, like you, are imperfect and in need of grace? The challenge for many believers is that forgiveness feels unfair. We think, if I forgive them, they're getting away with what they did. But forgiveness does not mean the absence of justice. It means placing justice in God's hands instead of your own. Forgiveness is not excusing the wrong. It is refusing to let that wrong have power over your heart. It's setting yourself free from the prison of resentment. Think of unforgiveness as carrying a heavy backpack filled with stones. Each offense, each bitter thought, each replay of the hurt in your mind adds another stone. Over time, the weight becomes unbearable, draining your joy, peace, and spiritual energy. Forgiveness is the moment you take the backpack off and lay it at the feet of Jesus. It's the choice to no longer carry what you were never meant to bear. And here's the truth. Forgiveness is not just for the one who hurt you. it's for you. Unforgiveness poisons the soul. It distorts your view of God, yourself, and others. It keeps you stuck in the past while God is calling you forward into freedom. Jesus said in Matthew 6:15, "If ye forgive not men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses." This is not because God's forgiveness is conditional, but because unforgiveness blocks the flow of His grace in your life. A closed hand cannot receive. So how do you live out Ephesians 4:32 in real life? It begins with remembering how much you have been forgiven. When you truly grasp the depth of God's mercy toward you, it becomes much harder to withhold mercy from others. You start to see forgiveness not as a burden, but as a privilege, a way of showing the same grace you have received. Then, you choose forgiveness daily. Forgiveness is not always a one-time event. Sometimes the hurt is so deep that you have to keep forgiving every time the memory resurfaces. This is why Jesus told Peter to forgive 70 times 7, Matthew 18:22. It's not about counting, it's about cultivate by lifestyle where forgiveness flows freely because your heart is rooted in grace. You also pray for the person you need to forgive. This may feel impossible at first, but something powerful happens when you bring someone before God in prayer. Over time, God changes your heart toward them. The anger softens, the bitterness fades, and sometimes, though not always, reconciliation becomes possible. Even if the relationship never returns to what it was, your heart can be healed. Finally, you trust God with the outcome. Forgiveness does not always mean trust is immediately restored, nor does it mean you put yourself back in harm's way. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is forgive from a distance while allowing God to work in both hearts. But in all cases, you release the need to control the situation and let God be the judge, the healer, and the restorer.
Imagine if every believer truly lived out Ephesians 4:32. Marriages would be healed, friendships would be restored, churches would become havens of grace rather than battlegrounds of offense. Families would break cycles of bitterness that have lasted for generations, and most importantly, the watching world would see a picture of God's love in action. Today, God is calling you to live this verse. Is there someone you need to forgive? Is there a hurt you've been holding on to, hoping the other person will make it right? Ephesians 4:32 is your invitation to let go, not because they deserve it, but because you have been forgiven so much more. Let kindness replace criticism. Let tenderness replace hardness. Let forgiveness flow freely, just as it flowed to you through the cross of Christ. And when you choose to forgive, you will discover something remarkable.
Colossians 3:13. Forbearing one another and forgiving one another, if any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. This verse is like a mirror that forces us to look at the way we deal with people. It doesn't just tell us to forgive. It starts with a word that is even more challenging for some hearts: forbearing. To forbear means to put up with, to patiently endure the shortcomings, mistakes, and irritations of others without immediately lashing out or cutting them off. Before forgiveness even comes into play, Paul is teaching us about the posture of grace. We live in a world where people are quick to cancel, quick to block, quick to walk away from anyone who inconveniences them. But the kingdom of God operates differently. To forbear is to choose love over frustration. It is to say, I see your flaws, but I will not let them become the reason I treat you without love. Forbearance is a kind of grace in action before grace is even requested. Then Paul moves from forbearing to forgiving one another. Forgiveness here is not portrayed as optional or situational. The language makes it clear. If there is a quarrel, if there is a conflict, if there is a wound, forgiveness is required. But this is where many of us wrestle internally. We think, what if they hurt me deeply? What if they never apologize?
What if they keep doing it? Paul doesn't leave room for such exceptions here. Instead, he raises the standard far above our feelings. Even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. And that's the part that changes everything. How did Christ forgive you? He forgave you before you asked. He forgave you without conditions. He forgave you knowing you would fail again. His forgiveness was not reluctant, it was generous. He didn't give you half mercy or partial grace. He went all the way to the cross to ensure you could be fully free. This is the model we are called to imitate. It's not about looking at the other person and deciding whether they're worthy of forgiveness. It's about looking at Jesus and remembering that we were not worthy anyway, yet He forgave us anyway. When you see your own need for mercy, it becomes much harder to withhold mercy from others.
One of the most powerful truths about forgiveness is that it is a decision, not a feeling. You may never feel like forgiving, especially if the wound is fresh or deep. But forgiveness is an act of obedience to God and an act of trust in His justice. It's saying, Lord, I release this person from my judgment because I trust you to handle the outcome. And in that moment, you are freed from the heavy chain of resentment. Forbearance and forgiveness work together like two hands in prayer. Forbearance keeps you from building offenses in the first place. Forgiveness clears away offenses when they do happen. Without forbearance, every small irritation can grow into a quarrel. Without forgiveness, every quarrel can grow into a wall. But with both in place, relationships have the space to heal, breathe, and grow. Think about the relationships in your own life. How many of them have been strained not because of major betrayals, but because of small, repeated irritations that were never let go? Forbearance would have prevented bitterness from taking root. Forgiveness would have uprooted any bitterness that did take root. This is why Paul links the two together. This verse also hints at something important. Forgiveness is not just about healing after harm. It's about maintaining unity before harm escalates. If you forbear and forgive quickly, you close the door on the enemy's schemes to divide you from others. Ephesians 4:27 warns us, neither give place to the devil. Unforgiveness gives him a place. Forbearance and forgiveness shut him out. And here's a humbling truth. God has to forbear with us daily. Every day we fall short in some way. Every day we need His patience as we grow. And yet He doesn't treat us with irritation or annoyance. He treats us with mercy. He forgives us when we ask, and He bears with us while we learn. If the perfect, holy God can forbear with us, how much more should we be willing to forbear with one another? Living out Colossians 3 verse 13 requires a conscious decision to see people through the lens of grace. When you look at someone and only see their offense, you will harden your heart. But when you look at them and remember that Christ also died for them, that He also extends forgiveness to them, something shifts inside you. You start to pray for them instead of plotting against them. You start to hope for their redemption instead of their downfall. Forgiveness also has a ripple effect. When you forgive, you open a channel for God's peace to flow into your life. That peace affects how you treat others, which in turn influences them to treat others differently. One act of forgiveness can break a chain of anger that has stretched across years or even generations. You never know how far the impact of your obedience will go.
But let's be honest. Forgiving like Christ is costly. It costs you your pride, your desire for revenge, and sometimes your need to win the argument. It requires humility. Yet every time you choose to forgive, you become more like Jesus. Every time you forbear instead of explode, you grow in the fruit of the Spirit. And every time you extend grace, you declare to the world that God's way is better than bitterness. Today, think about the quarrels that may exist in your life. Some may be loud and obvious. Others may be silent, but just as damaging. What would it look like for you to forbear in love and forgive from the heart? What would it look like to measure your forgiveness not by your feelings, but by Christ's example. Paul's words are not easy to live, but they are liberating when obeyed. Even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye, is not just a command, it's a key to freedom. It frees you from carrying grudges. It frees you from replaying offenses in your mind. It frees you to love without fear and to live without the weight of unresolved pain. So choose today to forbear. Choose today to forgive. Not because it's easy, not because the other person deserves it, but because Christ has done the same for you. And in doing so, you will walk in the same freedom He died to give you.
If you want more content like this, kindly hit the subscribe and like button. And don't forget to share. Stay blessed.